It's not just about where you keep your rosary, it's also about what sits next to it. Every object carries a spiritual signature. Some invite light, and others quietly pull you away from heaven. Padre Pio once said, "Even holy things grow silent when surrounded by vanity, impurity, or pride." You may be storing your rosary near something that blocks grace, and the worst part, you probably never knew it was dangerous. Stay with me until the end. There is a prayer you must say tonight to purify your space. Many Catholics commit a quiet mistake without realizing it. They place their rosary near objects that carry a completely different spiritual tone. It may seem harmless to store a rosary next to jewelry, expensive perfume bottles, beauty products, or even decorative boxes filled with charms or zodiac trinkets. But Padre Pio warned that the spiritual power of a blessed item like the rosary can become muted when it is surrounded by things that promote vanity, superstition, or worldly distraction. The rosary is not a fashion accessory or a household ornament. It is a sacred weapon of prayer designed to draw grace, protection, and the presence of the Virgin Mary into one's life. When it is kept next to symbols of self-obsession or spiritual confusion, it becomes spiritually disoriented. The problem lies in contradiction. The rosary represents humility, purity, and surrender. But many of the objects people store beside it, astrology charms, lucky coins, energy stones, and even certain symbols marketed as spiritual, are rooted in beliefs that conflict with the gospel. Keeping these items together sends a mixed message not only to heaven, but to the soul itself. It creates spiritual noise where there should be silence. Worse, it can open subtle doors to spiritual oppression. Padre Pio was especially concerned about Catholics unknowingly participating in practices that dilute their faith. He often reminded the faithful that demonic influence thrives in ambiguity. When the sacred and the profane are mixed, confusion enters, and where there is confusion, prayer loses clarity and power. Even more common is the habit of tossing the rosary into a bag filled with makeup, money, receipts, and digital distractions. In that environment, the rosary becomes just another item, buried, ignored, and forgotten. It no longer stands apart as holy. It blends in with everything else that pulls the soul toward the world instead of toward God. Some keep their rosary in their bedroom, but place it beside their phone, headphones, or books, filled with secular ideas or unclean entertainment. The issue is not ownership, but atmosphere. The rosary, like a candle, needs space to give off its light. When that space is polluted, the flame grows dim. The faithful must understand that spiritual objects respond to spiritual environments. If the space around your rosary is spiritually unhealthy, the grace it channels becomes restricted. It does not mean the blessing is lost, but it does mean the flow is hindered. Padre Pio's warning was not about superstition, it was about spiritual alignment. And when your rosary rests in the wrong company, it no longer speaks clearly to heaven. The rosary is more than a string of beads. It is a spiritual instrument that connects the physical world to the divine. Padre Pio saw it not as a symbol, but as a vessel, something that carried grace, protection, and the presence of the Blessed Mother into the places it touched. However, for that grace to move freely, the surrounding environment must be in harmony with its purpose. When a rosary is placed beside objects that represent pride, superstition, or vanity, it sends a conflicting message to the spiritual realm. Grace does not vanish, but it becomes suffocated like a flame struggling for oxygen. Spiritual reality is sensitive. Holy objects absorb the atmosphere around them. A rosary that rests in a drawer full of trivial, impure, or ego-centered things gradually reflects that energy. It is not that the rosary becomes unholy, it is that the space becomes inhospitable to prayer. The spiritual world is not neutral. Every object, every image, every symbol either draws the soul closer to God or pulls it subtly away. When sacred, items are stored near things associated with the occult, astrology, or sensual indulgence. The line between light and shadow begins to blur, and in blurred spaces, clarity is lost. Prayer weakens, focus disappears, the voice of heaven becomes faint. Padre Pio understood that the demonic does not need to attack directly. Often it simply waits in the confusion. When the sacred is treated casually, stored in places that mix devotion with distraction, it loses its place of honor. The Rosary becomes just another thing, and the home becomes spiritually cluttered. Grace is orderly. It rests where purity and intention are present. But when the soul allows contradiction, placing a rosary next to something spiritually compromised, it invites interference. Not always dramatic, often quiet, slow, and unnoticed, but real. There is also a deeper truth. The rosary, like all sacramentals, responds to the disposition of the one who possesses it. When a believer chooses to place it with care, surround it with reverence, and keep it in clean spiritual company, it becomes a true extension of prayer. But when it is thrown beside meaningless or harmful objects, it becomes spiritually silenced. The grace is still offered, but the heart no longer hears it. This is not superstition, it is spiritual order. And when the order is broken, so too is the connection between the sacred and the soul. Padre Pio's warning is not about fear, it is about alignment, and alignment begins with where we place the things that matter most. To restore the power and spiritual clarity of the Rosary, one must first examine the space in which it rests. Padre Pio emphasized that the placement of holy objects is not a superficial matter. It reflects the interior order of the soul. The first step is simple yet profound. Remove the rosary from any area that contains objects tied to vanity, pride, superstition, or impurity. This includes crystals, astrological symbols, dream catchers, fashion jewelry, or entertainment media that promotes values contrary to the gospel. The presence of the rosary must not be diluted by association with things that carry spiritual confusion. Once removed from such an environment, the rosary should be given a new place, a space that communicates reverence and peace. A small prayer corner, a nightstand near a Bible, or a shelf with a crucifix or icon becomes a worthy resting place. Even a folded linen cloth and a single candle can transform an ordinary spot into holy ground. The goal is not extravagance, but intentionality. A clean and quiet place dedicated to reflection allows the rosary to reclaim its purpose as a vessel of prayer and protection. Padre Pio also encouraged the faithful to re-establish their connection with the rosary through touch and daily presence. Even when time does not allow for a full recitation, the simple act of holding the rosary, carrying it close, or offering a Hail Mary throughout the day reawakens the spiritual bond. The rosary is not meant to rest untouched. It should be part of one's physical and spiritual rhythm. Let it be visible. Let it interrupt daily routine with reminders of heaven. Grace flows where the soul is awake and engaged. In cases where the rosary has been long neglected or misused, a simple act of rededication can restore its spiritual atmosphere. One may hold it while praying a blessing, place it before a candle, or sprinkle it with holy water as a sign of renewal. This is not about re-blessing the object, but about reorienting the heart. It is the interior disposition that breathes new life into sacramentals. The rosary responds to reverence. It does not demand perfection, only sincerity. Finally, the faithful are called to guard the environment around the rosary. Just as one would protect a sacred space in a church, the same care must be extended to the sacred space within the home. The objects near the rosary should reflect the values of faith, humility, purity, and devotion. A small crucifix, a holy image, or even a handwritten prayer can serve as companions to this sacred tool. When the Rosary is honored, it becomes active. When the space is spiritually clean, grace flows without resistance. Padre Pio knew that small external choices lead to deep internal transformation. And where the Rosary lives, heaven begins to dwell. Now is the time to look around and ask a simple but serious question. Where does your Rosary live? Not just physically, but spiritually. What is surrounding it? What is it resting beside? These small choices reveal something much deeper than organization or habit. They reveal priorities of the soul. Padre Pio never underestimated the power of environment. He understood that grace enters where it is welcomed, where it is protected, where it is given space to breathe. A rosary placed with reverence becomes an invitation for heaven to dwell. A rosary buried in clutter, distraction, or impurity becomes silent. It still holds its blessing, but the connection grows cold. The faithful must not treat the rosary as just another item among many. It is not a lucky charm or an accessory. It is a sign of battle, a rope to heaven, a gift of the Blessed Mother herself. And like any precious gift, it must be cherished, displayed with dignity and used with devotion. That begins with removing what doesn't belong, objects that carry false spirituality, pride, vanity, or confusion. It continues by choosing a place of honor, even if small, even if humble. A corner with light, with quiet, with prayer, but it does not end there. The rosary must become part of the daily rhythm again. Not just seen but held, not just remembered but used. Padre Pio held his rosary with love because he knew it was alive with power, but that power was not automatic. It responded to faith, to reverence, to purity of heart. The same must be true in every home. Every believer has the ability to transform a space into a sanctuary. All it takes is the courage to clean, to separate, to set apart what belongs to God. And so, with sincerity and urgency, every soul is invited to take this step. Find the rosary, lift it from where it has been resting, and place it somewhere better. And then speak, not just from the lips but from the heart, a prayer of renewal. Let the Blessed Mother know that her gift has not been forgotten, that her weapon is still drawn, that her child still fights in light. Holy Mother, I remove from this place all that dims your presence. Let my home reflect your purity. Let my rosary rest near light, near silence, near love. May the space around it be worthy of the grace it carries, and may my soul never again forget what it holds. This is not a small act. It is the first step in restoring order to the soul. Padre Pio warned out of love, because he saw what happens when we let the sacred fall into shadow. But he also saw what happens when we lift it back into the light. Grace returns, peace enters, and heaven draws near.